The Ukrainian 4th Tank Brigade showed a captured Russian T-72 in service. The tank's hull is from a T-72B3 and the turret from a T-72B1 tank, plus the added roof screen. Some of the battalions have T-72 AMTs, T-72As from the late 1970s that Ukraine extensively upgraded in the 1990s. Others have T-72M1s, which are T-72As the Soviet Union and other Warsaw Pact countries improved with additional armor. Poland and the Czech Republic both manufactured the T-72M1 under license, and each has pledged scores of the 45-ton, 3-person tanks to the Ukrainian war effort. Altogether, Ukraine has gotten, or soon should get, more than 400 T-72s of all models from its foreign allies. But that doesn't mean the Ukrainian armed forces have enough T-72s, as losses of the best Western-style tanks, Leopard 2s especially, pile up. It's looking increasingly likely that Kyiv will need hundreds more T-72s to replace the 500 or so tanks it has lost, while also equipping new brigades. Which helps to explain why the 4th Tank Brigade went to extraordinary lengths to Klug. Together, a unique T-72 from the wreckage of no fewer than 3 different tank models. This Frankenstein's monster of a tank underscores Ukraine's escalating tank crisis. In addition to receiving hundreds of T-72s from its allies, Ukraine also has captured from Russia hundreds of T-72s as well as hundreds of T-90s, T-80s, and T-62s. Many of these tanks took damage before their crews abandoned them or died inside of them. Never once to waste a vehicle. The Ukrainians sometime before this spring identified 3 partially wrecked ex-Russian tanks that, added together, still made one functional tank. A T-72B1 had a working turret, but a damaged hull. A T-72B3 had an intact hull, but was missing a road wheel. An obsolete T-62 had wheels to spare. Technicians combined the wrecks and produced a one-off tank with the turret of a T-72B1, the hull of a T-72B3, and a single T-62 road wheel. This Frankentank appeared on the front line in March, and again this month with the 4th Tank Brigade, which has split its battalions between southern and eastern Ukraine. The Frankentank in essence is a T-72B1, with that variant's aging fire controls and 2A46M 125mm main gun. But with a B3's uprated 860 horsepower diesel engine in place of the B1's less powerful 780 horsepower diesel, it's ugly and weird and probably less capable than the 4th Brigade's best T-72 AMTs, but more capable than its T-72 M1s. In any event, the awkward Frankentank speaks to Ukraine's desperate need for more and better armored fighting vehicles as the wider war grinds toward its 3rd year.
Це танк 82Б, вжатий в Ізюмської операції. Це була річ.
Ukraine's military announced on Tuesday that the milestone of Russian soldiers killed in action since the Kremlin's February 2022 invasion had reached 300,000. Circumstantial evidence supports the figure, but just how accurate it actually is another question. The Armed Forces of Ukraine has published precise daily numbers for the Russian personnel its intelligence officers believe died in combat or otherwise lost their lives during the previous 24 hours. However, the Ukrainians does not facilitate independent checks of its estimates, and the media is banned from the lines of contact. It only rarely allows independent observers to contact selected frontline troops, and then under the supervision of an escort officer. To date, the Ukrainian army has refused to allow outside checks of its battlefield estimates on grounds of security. According to open-source reports and interviews held by Kyiv Post with army officers and enlisted personnel, the Ukrainian daily data of eliminated Russian service personnel is mainly acquired through the study of video recordings by drones of Russian corpses lying on the ground. To a much lesser extent, the Ukrainians will use confirmed casualty counts from Russian medical treatment centers, particularly civilian hospitals in the occupied territories, and, in rarer cases, information gathered by its behind-the-lines agents. Ukrainian spokesmen have repeatedly claimed their methodology is rigorous and internally checked, and that their estimated numbers of Russian dead, although impossible to compute with total precision in a total war, are as accurate as possible and very likely close to reality. According to official Ukrainian estimates, the Russian army's worst months for casualties were in March 2022 during the early weeks of the invasion, in Battle of Bakhmut the first half of 2023, and in recent weeks following massed frontal attacks on Ukrainian fortified defenses around the city Avdiivka. If the figure of 300,000 Russian soldiers dead over the past 20 months is accurate, then this represents not just a material and operational near disaster for the Russian military, but a real body blow for Russian Federation demographics. In a Monday post on his personal Telegram channel, Anton Gerashchenko, a Ukrainian Interior Ministry advisor and one of the highest profile Ukrainian spokesmen, portrayed what 300,000 corpses amounted to in terms calculated to raise Ukrainian public spirit. 300,000 dead Russians, Gerashchenko informed readers of his blog, is more than the sum total of every Roman soldier who served in every Roman legion at the height of the empire, is the equivalent of one Russian soldier being killed every 3 minutes. The number is such that, if laid end to end from Moscow to St. Petersburg, you could walk on corpses the whole distance without ever touching the ground. There are so many bodies that if they were to put into body bags and piled it neatly in Red Square, the stacks would cover the square completely in piles as tall as a man. Some outside observers question the Ukrainian official and social media estimates. One of the most recent and detailed research papers on the subject, published by the European Center for Political Research, estimated the Ukrainian, either by accident or intentionally inflates the evidence it has on the number of Russian soldiers killed in combat by a factor of 2. France 24 News said that a joint investigation conducted by a Russian media outlet and a Germany-based data scientist using open-source Russian data in July came up with the number of Russian service personnel killed in Ukraine at about 1/4 the official Kyiv number. Another source, the Russian government Registry of Inheritance Claims, suggests that the Kremlin was most likely losing 2,500 to 3,000 troops in Ukraine each month in 2023. If the rate of Russian military deaths since February 2022 is based guesswork with estimates varying so widely, finding a trustworthy and independently checked estimate of Ukrainian casualties is nigh on impossible. August comments to local media by Mikhailo Podolyak, a senior advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, restated the official Kyiv line that public announcements on Ukrainian casualty figures are the prerogative of the Army General Staff. The last time figures were given was in December, when Podolyak said in a television interview that the Ukrainian military had lost 10 to 13,000 soldiers. During periods of intense battle, Ukrainian forces, particularly in fighting around Bakhmut in summer 2022, were estimated to be losing between 700 to 1,000 men and women a day. Since then, with the exception of a stalled offensive launched a year later, Ukrainian losses, according to unit reports, have been substantially less, but continuous nevertheless. A column of Russian mobilized soldiers, reportedly from Chuvashia, were subject to Ukrainian HIMARS strikes. It is reported that the number of dead and wounded exceeds 100. Crimean Bridge is having more stomach problems this morning. Heavy smoke over the Crimean Bridge. Traffic along it is temporarily blocked. However, it is unclear exactly what happened. The smoke is like a smoke screen.
Стали на якорь на рейде. Вот, и должны были проходить через мост, но объявлена воздушная тревога, и вот такие вот дела. Честно, я не знаю, что это, но было бы очень интересно узнать. И вот, если слышно, играет до сих пор диктор, не знаю, псевдолевитан какой-то, говорит что-то там. Опачки. ПВО и спит.
Footage from the battles at Krinky area. Ukrainian Marines cross the Dnieper River with small boats and move cautiously through the swampy area while being under Russian fire. Establishing and expanding a bridgehead, there is a very difficult undertaking. While Ukrainian recon and drone units are striking Russian positions and reinforcements near Krinky, Ukrainian units are trying to expand their zone of control. Russian sources claim the Ukrainians are fighting its way southwest to Kozachi Laheri. There is enough evidence that Ukrainian forces successfully crossed the Dnipro River at multiple points. Among them is the settlement of Krinky. This is in line with claims from Russian sources, as well as the fact that the Russian commander of this sector, Colonel General Makarevich, has been removed from command, as reported in our previous videos. Since October 11th, the Ukrainian soldiers are on the left bank of the Dnipro. On October 14th, a massive attack on Russian positions began. I want to note that it was a very unexpected surprise for the Russians. Then the soldiers started assault on the village Krinky. The Russians did not expect this and paid for it. 4 invaders who were having breakfast were killed immediately. The rest of Russians, 25 of them, ran into the forest near village. They were later sent by the Russian command, together with special assaulters, to retake the village back. But it was not successful, and those assault group were destroyed. During this assault, 2 Russian soldiers surrendered without firing any single shot. Russian channel VTHK OGPU says that Russian General Teplinsky might have been a target in a strike against the command center of the Dnieper Army Group. The news about Teplinsky replacing Makarevich as the head of the Dnieper Group was leaked just days ago. This general, who comes from VDV, appears to be highly esteemed by Russian servicemen. Personally, I always take info from this channel with a big grain of salt, but they were right on several occasions. I would not be surprised if Teplinsky appears on some TV program in Russia in the next few weeks looking healthy. But if this information is true, and Teplinsky is knocked out in some capacity, it would be a big win for Ukraine. Urgent. As the KOGPU learned, today a strike was carried out at the command post of the Dnieper Group, which this week was headed by Colonel General Teplinsky. At the moment, it is known that at least 1 soldier was killed, and several were seriously injured. It is unknown whether Teplinsky was at the command post at that moment. The strike area was cordoned off, and a command was given to prevent the dissemination of information about the fact of the strike. The press center is preparing a statement about the successful destruction of another ATACMS missile. Shoigu reported that Russian air defense units shot down 37 Ukrainian planes, just a week after shooting the previous 24. He has already made calculations for destroying F-16s that aren't in Ukraine yet. Russian Defense Ministry has reported destroying all Ukrainian aircraft in the first week of war, by the way.
Успешно действуют расчеты противовоздушной обороны. За прошедший месяц ими уничтожено свыше 1400 средств воздушного нападения противника, в том числе 37 самолетов и 6 оперативно-тактических ракет «Атакамс», производства Соединенных Штатов. При этом хочу отметить, что 37 самолетов – это почти в 2 раза больше того количества, которое гарантированно обещано поставкам Украине по самолетам F-16. То есть при такой работе нашей системы противовоздушной обороны это примерно на 20 дней работы.
The American Air Defense System M1097 Avenger is in service with the armed forces of Ukraine. First, T-72 versus Leopard 2 tank duel, by the way. As the sources who posted several videos of this fight report, the T-72 scored a lucky hit with the very first shot. New recruitment scheme for those unwilling to join the Russian army. The Russian army has seen a decline in interest in contract service. The Kremlin needs to look for new cannon fodder. They have decided that debtors will become contract servicemen. Therefore, all data on those who owe loans was transferred to the Ministry of Defense. Now the debtors will be driven into the army by threats, either pay or go to war. In the third quarter, Russian banks sold overdue debts to debt collectors for a record 800 million. For example, in the Turn quarter, this amount was 450 million. Basically, a debtor is a credit user who is about 40 years old, has secondary or higher education, has a family, and needs to provide for it. This requires not only a high income but also benefits, such as credit freezes, preferential mortgages. The Ministry of Defense tempts Russians with all this. According to the central bank, the most MFI clients are in Tiva, 15.3%, Altai, 9.6%, occupied Sevastopol, 9.4%. Debtors of other loan types mostly live in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Krasnodar region, Sverdlovsk region, and Bashkortostan. Ukrainian armed forces carried out a strike on the Russian command center of the Dnipro grouping. Russian telegram channel VCHK OGPU reports, allegedly there is at least one dead and several wounded. The Dnipro grouping was recently headed by Colonel General Teplinsky. Whether he was at the command post at that moment is unknown. The area of the strike has been cordoned off, and a command has been given to prevent the spread of information about the fact of the hit. Notably, it has been written many times that Teplinsky is in disfavor with Shoigu and Gerasimov. And allegedly, the Russian general staff would not mind getting rid of a general who is too independent. But if this information is true, and Teplinsky is knocked out in some capacity, it would be a big win for Ukraine. 1 year ago, we warned that Russian President Vladimir Putin was willing to trade more than 300,000 coffins for a modern-day Kievan Russ's empire. Yesterday, on Halloween, the devil got his due. Ukraine's defense ministry reported more than 300,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in action as a result of Putin's special military operation. Faustian deal or not, Putin's gambit is not paying off. The scale of Russian military losses over the past year is staggering, as is the accelerating rate of those killed. On January 1st, Ukraine reported 106,720 Russian soldiers had died. By June 1st, losses had nearly doubled to 208,370 killed, it said. After only 10 months this year, Putin is now closing in on tripling his losses in Ukraine, and at a rate nearly double that which he lost during the first year of the war. It is not sustainable and is suggestive that the Russian Defense Ministry may be nearing culmination in Ukraine, or has effectively already culminated. At a minimum, Putin has expended Russia's best-trained forces. The battle for Avdiivka is Putin's latest nightmare in a year of unending horrors. Losses are far worse than in Bakhmut and exponentially so. Moscow's attempted encirclement of Avdiivka was likely designed to coincide with Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel, launched on October 9th. It began 2 days after the Iran-backed terrorist group unleashed a horrific attack on Israeli civilians and foreign nationals, prompting a war in Gaza that threatens to spread. Yet whereas Bakhmut was a battle of the Somme-like meat grinder decimating waves of Russian infantrymen and PMC Wagner paramilitary forces, Avdiivka has also witnessed the pulverizing of Russian mechanized and armored brigades in less than 1 month. Putin evidently has learned little since Bakhmut. He appears to keep failing to consider rapidly changing realities on the battlefield in Donetsk that are emerging because of condition-setting criteria established by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his generals. Moscow's decision-making is predicated upon Russian artillery being king, but it no longer is. Ukraine's military has directed much of its attention the past several months to locating and destroying Russian artillery systems, counter-battery formations, and their ammunition stores. The evidence is in the raw numbers and trends. Since June, the Defense Ministry says Ukraine has nearly doubled the amount of Russian artillery it has destroyed. Now reportedly 7,227 pieces. Even if we discount the whole numbers, it is the trend that matters. and clearly Putin is losing the war of artillery attrition. He should have known better. Russian Major General Ivan Popov tried warning him in July. Popov claimed Moscow was angry with him for pointing out that Russia was losing the counter-battery fire war with Ukraine, particularly the shortage of radars tracking enemy artillery, which was resulting in massive Russian casualties. Russian casualties in Ukraine have become worse since Popov was fired. Nonetheless, Putin remains nonplussed and undeterred by the Russian death toll in Ukraine. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the Russian military command appears to have committed most of the 8th Combined Army of the Southern Military District, and transferred elements of the Central Military District for offensive operations in the Avdiivka area. The Institute also reported that Ukrainian military analyst Kostyantin Mashovets concluded that Russian forces in the Avdiivka direction have elements of 12 separate motorized rifle brigades, 16 separate rifle regiments of the Mobilization Reserve, 22 separate rifle battalions of the Mobilization Reserve, 11 separate tank battalions, a separate motorized rifle battalion, and 3 consolidated tactical detachments of the battalion level, including BARs, Russian Combat Army Reserve, and Storm Z units. If these numbers are accurate, the failure by Russian ground forces to encircle and seize Avdiivka is telling. Sheer mass and repeated failed frontal assaults by poorly trained, equipped, and led soldiers does not win wars, especially in the context of Ukraine reporting that Putin lost 4,000 soldiers, which, if true, would be, as the Kiev Independent describes, the worst casualty rate of the war. Up-to-date numbers are not yet available. However, Ukraine claims it destroyed more than 400 Russian armored vehicles, although the Institute for the Study of War assessed it at 109 as of October 20th. Putin likely pushed ahead, counting on Western mainstream media to be distracted by the widening war in Israel. To that end, his gamble worked. Many media outlets ignored his counterattack in Donetsk. Still, where it counts most, on the battlefield, Putin is failing in Avdiivka, Ukraine's counter-battery fire, and more recently, its use of attack MS-delivered cluster munitions have been game changers. Putin needs a game changer of his own before new US and NATO weapon systems come online in Ukraine, including F-16 fighter jets, Germany's Taurus cruise missile, longer-range ATAC MS munitions, and the M1 Abrams main battle tank. Putin soon may try to freeze the battlefield and/or seek a ceasefire or settlement to regroup and fight another day. This might explain why Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu stated in his remarks during his trip to the Beijing-Xiangshan Forum on Monday that Moscow is ready for talks on the post-conflict settlement of the war in Ukraine. If that happens, the West must not be deceived. Putin cannot be trusted to honor his word. Russia has a long history of using ceasefires and peace plans to buy time that's needed to reconstitute its armed forces and then resume their assault. Besides, Ukraine has momentum. Why would Kyiv settle for a ceasefire when they can remove the threat and regain their country? Following a surge in anti-Semitic sentiment in the Dagestan region of Russia, the daily housing rental company Kak Doma 05 was accused of providing services to clients from Israel. The co-owner of the company, 33-year-old Layla, has recorded a video in which she stated that she would personally evict Jews if they appeared in one of her 47 apartments. And Russian invaded Ukraine because it's a Nazi state. Clowns.
Мы не заселяем евреев. У меня 47 объектов в городе. И за всеми я следила тщательно, а теперь буду еще более тщательно следить. Во всех квартирах имеется камера. Ни один еврей, приехавший с Израиля, не заселится в наши квартиры. И даже если нас надурят, я посмотрю камеры и вычислю это, то я выселю его. Обязательно, поверьте мне. Прекратите, пожалуйста, нас проверять в Авито, спрашивать, сдаем ли мы квартиру евреям. Нет, не сдаем. Мы за народ Палестины.
Ukrainian Marines were improving positions and trading fire with Russian patrols in the latest villages captured by Kiev's forces on the left bank of the Dnipro River. official and independent reports said on Wednesday. Meanwhile, Russian forces have responded for nearly a week with ground counterattacks against the bridgehead. Yesterday, Russia launched at least 36 B-500-1500 guided glide bombs at targets on both sides of the Dnipro in Kherson. That is a record and is an indication of the high level of Russian concern regarding Ukrainian activity there. Both official Ukrainian military sources and local social media said the Marine advance was by infantry carrying heavy weapons and supplies, and that they started digging in immediately. Undated video posted by the Armed Forces of Ukraine showed heavily armed infantrymen moving through low-lying swamp and marsh, at times under small arms and mortar fire, reportedly in the Krinky sector. Local social media confirmed Ukrainian Marine presence. In the same time, Russian sources confirmed that the armed forces of Ukraine have managed to expand their control of territory in the vicinity of Krinky. A Kherson military information telegram channel posted images of Ukrainian Marines flying observation drones and firing 120mm mortars in support of troops holding the bridgehead, according to the report. Other news outlets posted before and after clips of a group of burnt-out vehicles, claiming that Russian mobilized soldiers, a battalion of Shuvash, were targeted by Ukrainian HIMARS strikes in the Kherson region, resulting more than 100 casualties. Also, Russian sources posted the information that the Ukrainian armed forces carried out a strike on the Russian command center of the Dnipro grouping. Allegedly, there is at least one dead and several wounded. The Dnipro grouping was recently headed by Colonel General Teplinsky. Whether he was at the command post at that moment is unknown. The area of the strike has been cordoned off, and a command has been given to prevent the spread of information about the fact of the hit. Elements of Ukraine's 35th, 36th, 37th, and 38th Marine Brigades, according to multiple reports, crossed the Dnipro River using small boats on October 22nd in the southern sector, entering and capturing the effectively undefended riverside villages Pishchanivka, Pidstepny, and Poima, near the town Oleshki. A follow-up Marine crossing some 25 kilometers upriver established a second toehold bridgehead in the village of Krinky. An October 31st report from the Russian Military Information Channel said Kremlin forces were having trouble deploying heavy weapons to attack the Ukrainian Marines around Krinky because of the very soft ground along the Dnipro River floodplain and near total absence of hard roads in the vicinity. Some sections of lower Dnipro riverbank are paralleled by a tributary, the smaller but impossible to wade Konka River. Terrain around all four of the Ukrainian bridgehead village positions is thickly wooded, swampy, and on the left bank of the Konka River. Ukrainian advances south of the Konka would exit marshy lowlands and enter better drained farm fields. The Ukrainian Marines in both the Oleshki and Krinky bridgeheads appear to be digging in and preparing to defend their positions, but also throwing out patrols in a possible attempt to link the two bridgeheads, Russian military information sources said. The pro-Russia Yerrakon news platform said in a tweet, "Tension around Krinky remains high. The enemy is retaining its positions around this village. It is putting in artillery-dropped remote mines around the village, and with this tactic making approach by Russian Federation forces more complicated. Our demining engineers are regularly hit by effective fire, and Ukrainian drones are dropping munitions. The enemy is trying to expand its control of territory around Krinky in the direction of Kozachi Laheri. Besides this, the enemy is improving its positions around Pidstepna." Russia's response, a week into the Ukrainian cross-river incursion, has been for the most part limited to intermittent artillery shelling and an uptick in airstrikes. Ukraine's Ministry of Emergency Situations in a November 1st statement said Russian air forces had bombed or rocketed the Krinky vicinity 8 times in the past 24 hours. The Russian Defense Ministry Rybar's information platform in a November 1st statement said, "In the Kherson sector, Ukrainian assault formations are continuing to hold the central portion of Krinky. Thanks to the transfer of additional reinforcing troops, the enemy has succeeded in slightly expanding its zone of control to the west." Earlier this week, it was reported that President Putin had dismissed the commander in charge of the Russian NPR grouping of forces in the face of repeated Ukrainian incursions. And let's see the other news. Donetsk Oblast, a Ukrainian soldier modified an RPG-7 to shoot a shovel, seen here firing it at a Russian position. folks. Sanctions are for the best. Less chances that bed bugs will be exported to us from large European cities. More sanctions for Russia, please. It's a personal request from Putin.
В своих фантазиях просто доходят до абсурда. Вы тоже это знаете, уважаемые коллеги. Предлагают запретить ввоз в Россию отверток, иголок и так далее. Но чем меньше барахла, тем, может быть, даже и лучше. Меньше шансов, что из крупных европейских мегаполисов к нам будут экспортировать постельных клопов.
Striking footage of a BMPT Terminator operating in the Serebryansky forest near Kremenaya. The BMPT Terminator is a tank support fighting vehicle or an armored fighting vehicle designed for supporting tanks and other AFVs in urban areas. The BMPT is unofficially named the Terminator by the manufacturers. It is heavily armed and armored to survive in urban combat. The AFV is armed with 4 9M 120 Ataka missile launchers, 2 30mm 2A42 autocannons, 2 AG-17D grenade launchers, and 1 coaxial 7.62mm PKTM machine gun. The BMPT is built on the chassis of the widely used T-72 main battle tank. The BMPT was designed based on combat experience gained during the Soviet-Afghan War and the First Chechen War. Multiple prototypes of a tank support combat vehicle were created prior to the design of the current BMPT. The Object 199 Ramka was the prototype later to be designated the modern BMPT, with the official producer being Uralvagonzavod. By late 2013, the only operator of the BMPT was Kazakhstan. A small number were delivered to the Russian ground forces for evaluation beginning in 2005. The Russian Defense Ministry finally ordered the BMPT in August 2017. Deliveries of more than 10 vehicles were begun in early 2018. On the 1st of December 2021, the first BMPT company of 9 combat vehicles was introduced into one of the tank regiments of the Tank Division of the Central Military District. The version, unofficially dubbed the Terminator 3, incorporates the chassis, hulls, and components of the T-14 Armata tank. Examples of an upgraded version of the BMPT-72 are participating in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, first observed during the Battle of Severodonetsk in Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have successfully disabled a Russian radio relay station in the border area near the village of Krasnaya Polyana, Belgorod region, the main Directorate of Intelligence has said. Members of the HUR, working in conjunction with their colleagues from the Special Operations Forces and the 1st Separate Special Forces Brigade named after Ivan Bohun, identified and rendered inoperative the high-value Russian radio relay station 48Y6K1 Podlet, a HUR statement read. HR claimed that the facility sustained damage during the operation, leading to casualties among the enemy's personnel. According to Russian media sources, the approximate cost of such a radar station is 700 million rubles, $5.5 million. The Russian Almaz Ante Corporation is responsible for the development of this mobile radar, with trials commencing in 2010. Designed to detect small, slow-moving, low-flying targets in challenging environments, the Podlet K1 has the capability to identify cruise missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles, and stealth aircraft. Almaz Ante has claimed that the station has superior target detection capabilities compared to the Universal S-400 systems. According to the developers, the Podlet K1 is purportedly capable of identifying approaching objects at distances of up to 300 kilometers and altitudes of up to 10 kilometers. Moreover, It can simultaneously track at least 200 targets. The initial deployment of Podlet K-1 complex, as stated by Army Inform, was geared toward fortifying Moscow's air defense in 2015. It comprises an antenna post, a control unit, and an electric generator. Furthermore, recent reports indicate that SSO fighters have also destroyed the Zoo Park radar system, with one located in the Zaporizhzhia direction and another in the Donetsk direction. Valued at $20 million, this system is utilized for countering artillery attacks and can identify mortar shells within 20 kilometers, artillery shells within 30 kilometers, and surface-to-air missiles within 50 kilometers, pinpointing the source of the incoming fire. Valery Zaluzhny, the head of Ukraine's armed forces, voiced his concerns in an interview with The Economist, highlighting that the situation on the front line has hit a point of stagnation. He pointed out that there's a huge risk of the ongoing Ukrainian offensive transitioning into a prolonged static conflict that could extend over many years. These are the highlights of the interview. 1. There will most likely be no deep and beautiful breakthrough. Zaluzhny said that the situation on the front lines has reached a deadlock. He warned that the ongoing Ukrainian offensive is at risk of evolving into a protracted positional warfare that could extend for years. There will most likely be no deep and beautiful breakthrough, he said. Just like in the First World War, we have reached the level of technology that puts us into a stalemate, he added. General Zaluzhny's perspective is gloomy, as he believes a significant technological breakthrough is needed to change the situation, and he doesn't anticipate any rapid or substantial advancements. 2. Russia can't be stopped simply by bleeding its troops. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine acknowledged that there was an error in assuming that Russia could be deterred by inflicting casualties on its troops. That was my mistake. Russia has lost at least 150,000 dead. In any other country, such casualties would have stopped the war. He went on to suggest that life holds a different value in Russia, and that Vladimir Putin is employing strategies reminiscent of combat tactics seen during the First and Second World Wars. 3. 4 months should have been enough time for us to have reached Crimea. Zaluzhny pointed out that the offensive plans of the Ukrainian armed forces had initially anticipated a rapid advancement of 30 kilometers per day, with the aim of overcoming Russian defensive lines. If you refer to NATO textbooks and our initial calculations, it should have taken us just 4 months to reach Crimea, engage in combat, withdraw from Crimea, and re-enter and exit the region, the commander-in-chief quoted as saying by The Economist. However, as The Economist reported, the Ukrainian army, equipped with Western technology, finds itself mired in minefields while facing the onslaught of Russian artillery and drone attacks instead. First, I thought there was something wrong with our commanders, so I changed some of them. Then I thought maybe our soldiers are not fit for purpose, so I moved soldiers in some brigades, says General Zaluzhny. However, it didn't make any substantial difference. 4. I realized that is exactly where we are, World War I. After the reshuffle in the military command did not give any result, he ordered his subordinates to find a book by Soviet Major General Pavel Smirnov, Breakthrough of Fortified Defense Lines in 1941, which analyzed the battles of the First World War. And before I got even halfway through it, I realized that is exactly where we are, because just like then, the level of our technological development today has put both us and our enemies in a stupor, Zaluzhny said. The simple fact is that we see everything the enemy is doing, and they see everything we are doing. In order for us to break this deadlock, we need something new, like the gunpowder which the Chinese invented, and which we are still using to kill each other, he added. According to his assessment, the Ukrainian military is in dire need of advancements in drone technology, electronic warfare capabilities, and equipment for clearing mines, including the integration of innovative robotic solutions. It is important to understand that this war cannot be won with the weapons of the past generation and outdated methods, Zaluzhny insisted. They will inevitably lead to delay, and as a consequence, defeat. However, General Zaluzhny noted that there are no indications of an imminent technological breakthrough in these areas. 5. The attritional trench war can wear down the Ukrainian state, Given that a technological breakthrough is not expected in the near future, the Ukrainian army can only continue the offensive, maintaining the initiative in order not to allow the war to become positional, Zaluzhny said. The biggest risk of an attritional trench war is that it can drag on for years and wear down the Ukrainian state, he says. We need to look for this solution. We need to find this gunpowder, quickly master it, and use it for a speedy victory. Because sooner or later, we are going to find that we simply don't have enough people to fight. Earlier, The Economist published an article by Zaluzhny, in which he stated that the war between Russia and Ukraine is moving towards a stalemate with grueling battles. Ukrainian journalist Butusov, with a fairly detailed overview of the Avdiivka battlefield, saying that mistakes were made by the military command that led to the current crisis. But Ukrainian forces remain in a favorable position if they manage to organize defense of the flanks properly. Battle for Avdiivka as of November 2nd. A critical situation developed, and there was a real threat of losing the city situation. Today, Russian troops crossed the railway line near the village of Stepov and began assault operations near the village itself, north of Avdiivka. Russian infantry has entrenched behind the railway and is accumulating to expand the bridgehead and to attack the Avdiivka coke plant, a key complex of structures that controls the approaches to Avdiivka. The capture of the plant will mean a gradual but inevitable complication of defenses and capture of the city. Suddenly, it turned out that during the battle in Avdiivka, not a single commander had built a rear line of defense, and it is necessary to dig in now. There are no ready positions. Russian assaults continue south of Avdiivka, where they are expanding the breakthrough in the area of the sand pit near the village of Opitny, which is the second direction of encirclement of Avdiivka. Here the threat also increases. Ukrainian troops are having success in combat operations directly in the city of Avdiivka. The 110th Mechanized Brigade skillfully repulsed all Russian attacks, completely restored several positions that the enemy captured during massive assaults on October 10th, 19, and even improved its positions in some directions. There is currently no threat of the enemy entering the city. Why is Avdiivka a tactical trap for the Russians? Now many will remember the scenario of the loss of Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Soledar, and Bakhmut. But the situation in Avdiivka is tactically different. First, the 110th Mechanized Brigade demonstrates exceptional combat capability and reliably holds the city, preventing the enemy from getting a hold of the city's buildings. The enemy is advancing north and south of the brigade's positions. Secondly, our troops have much more advantageous positions in terms of tactics, and they hold the flanks of the breakthrough well. Russian troops advance north of Avdiivka along a narrow corridor in the lowlands up to 4 kilometers wide. From this corridor, they are trying to cut our 8 kilometers wide supply routes to Avdiivka. Most of the enemy's rotations and reserves will be damaged during the advance, as the Ukrainian troops reliably hold the flanks and control the commanding heights with convenient firing sectors. The Russian infantry is suffering significant losses, and it is much more difficult for the enemy to conduct an offensive and hold positions than it is for us to defend. Thirdly, if we stabilize the defense north of Avdiivka, then even in positional defense, Russian troops will suffer losses many times higher than ours. The situation near Avdiivka carries much more risks for the Russian troops than for us. Fourth, the Russian troops do not have a large numerical advantage. The Ukrainians have a significant number of people and equipment. But in order to use all the advantages of our position, it is necessary to stabilize the defense. What shall I do? Our command has several action scenarios. First, the Bakhmut-Soledar scenario is to look for some units and direct them one by one into counterattacks. That is, head-on collisions with the advancing enemy, which are reduced to a quick exchange of manpower and to temporarily equipped lines, where the infantry somehow has to dig in, which leads to a quick loss of fighting capacity. To count our forces using staff reports and numbers of flags on the map, all the advances of the enemy should be justified by his great superiority in forces and not by deficiencies in our management. The main thing here is to constantly report that everything possible is being done and efforts are being made to restore the situation. Second, Normal scenario. Return the command of the troops north and south of the city to the command of the 110th Brigade, which has understanding of the situation and responsibility for the result, as it was before, during the main assaults. We need a single intelligence system, a single system. Transfer at least 2 battalions with responsible commanders with adequate combat experience and authority to be attached to the plant. The command of units that are not capable of building a defense in the direction of Stepov should be immediately replaced by more proven and more experienced ones. There are such brigades and combatants in the reserve of the General Staff. Regarding the quality of the reserves, if someone thinks that a battalion is any crowd of 600 mobilized with random commanders at the head, then it does not work like that. The reserves are not random, but controlled. The advantage in war is created by the commanders of the tactical unit. Stabilization of the defense will allow the Russian bridgehead in the area of Stepov and the factory to be squeezed from all sides, and to establish a systematic destruction of the Russian infantry. Let them sit there like in a shooting range. In that lowland, they will not be able to gather strength, and it will be a great shooting range for our guns. Supreme Commander-in-Chief Zelensky held many stake meetings in Avdiivka. But first of all, it must be said frankly, the crisis in Avdiivka is not a consequence of the great advantage of the Russians or their great superiority. It is also a crisis of some of our management decisions and approaches that do not give us the opportunity to realize our advantages. For civil society, if we want to keep Avdiivka, the value of which is much higher even than Bakhmut, we need to help the soldiers of the 110th Mechanized Brigade with the maximum number of drones, and we need the installation of video surveillance cameras at various objects. In our power to turn a crisis into a victory, we need the maximum concentration of efforts. And other news. The Kremlin has ordered regional officials to file weekly reports on the recruitment of marginalized people in Russia for its war in Ukraine. The investigative news website iStories reported Thursday, citing an official letter it obtained. The letter, which is dated October 3rd, lists the office of the presidential envoy to Russia's Central Federal District as the author, and states that military recruitment orders have been in place since March 1st, 2023. iStories notes that an attached document identifies some 22 disadvantaged categories of Russians who are targeted for contract-based recruitment into the military. Additional instructions order regional officials to track the number of people who are approached and agree to sign military contracts on a weekly basis. Priority targets for war recruitment are reportedly given to migrants and recently naturalized citizens, as well as debtors and the unemployed. It feels like they're getting rid of a marginalized layer of society. An anonymous recruitment officer in one of Russia's regions was quoted as saying by iStories, "They don't care at all about the quality of the army," the officer added. "They don't care what will happen to the recruits' families after they're deployed." The recruitment letter reveals that the Russian military still struggles to motivate people to voluntarily sign up for its war in Ukraine, said Sergei Krivenko, who heads the NGO Citizen Army and the Law. Signing a contract is still voluntary, but it's possible to persuade, set conditions, or make life unbearable, Krivenko told iStories. If everything was so good and people were signing contracts themselves, we wouldn't need all these tricks and efforts by regional authorities or monitor and kick those regional authorities.